Hello everyone, Mrs. Phillips here, and I wanted to talk to you today about a man named John Smith. John Smith was an English soldier, and he was born in 1580. And this man wanted to be an explorer. He wanted to do a lot of daring things, and he actually ended up doing that in his life. So to talk about his story, I first need to talk a little bit about money. So Spain, as you can see down in the bottom right, had already been sending their ships to the New World and back and coming back with a ton of gold, shipfuls of gold. So England naturally thought, we'll do the same thing. We're going to start sending our ships to the New World to get some more gold. The Virginia Company in England was the first to decide we need to send someone over to the New World to make some more money. Now, the Virginia Company was made mainly out of men that they called gentlemen. And I put gentlemen in quotes because really they weren't men that had a lot of manners or were known for being polite. They were called gentlemen simply because they had a lot of money. And they probably had a lot of servants. And these gentlemen decided that they wanted to make this voyage to the New World. They thought that they could literally sail on over and pick money right up off of the ground, pick up golden nuggets right up off of the ground. These men probably had never done a hard day's work in their entire life. They had slaves or servants themselves, so they weren't used to working. All they were thinking of was getting rich. And so the Virginia Company set off 3 ships, the Susan Constant, the Godspeed, and the Discovery. And all 3 ships were set off to the New World. On the Susan Constant was a man named Captain Newport, who was in charge of the entire journey. Along with him were 50 gentlemen on board, and around 55 of their servants or their workers to work the ships, and people who waited on the gentlemen. Also on the ship, John Smith. Now, before they left for their voyage, King James had given them a wooden box, and he said, once you land in the New World, I want you to open this new box, and it has my instructions for how I want you to build this new world and your new colony. So off they go, and while they are on this ship, Captain Newport hears an argument going on deck, goes up there, and it is John Smith arguing with the gentleman. And there is almost a fight breaking out to where they charge John Smith with mutiny, which means basically rebelling against the whole ship. And they put him in chains at the bottom of the ship as a prisoner. And he's actually supposed to be executed as soon as they land. Well, eventually they land and they find Virginia. And at Virginia, they finally remember, oh yeah, there was that box, remember? And so they finally opened the box. And in the box were the king's orders of who should be in charge to help set up Jamestown, this new colony. And guess whose name was on that list? John Smith. He was supposed to be one of the men who was in charge of setting up Jamestown. Those were the king's orders. However, he's in chains in the bottom of the ship, and the gentlemen don't particularly like him right now. and they actually leave him there and start making decisions on their own. They built Jamestown next to a river, which they named the James River. Awesome. Rivers are great places to build towns next to. Also, they built it right there along the coastline, which is great for ships to be able to come in and out. And especially when England is sending in supplies through ships or more people through ships, that's also an excellent place to be next to the coast so that ships can have access to where you are. So they did sort of well at this first point, and so well that they ended up letting out John Smith and freeing him. And as he comes out, he and some more realize that these gentlemen have made some huge mistakes with Jamestown. Some of their big mistakes, and these are just some of the main ones, are number one, they only wanted gold. And even when John Smith wanted to start planting gardens, building homes, making structures, making walls, they said, no, 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 you don't need to do that. We want you to go out and explore and look for gold. And so they wasted a lot of their time searching for gold. The second big mistake is they planted no gardens. Gardens are essential if you want food. And unless they thought the food on their ships was going to last them the rest of their lives, they should have planted some gardens to give themselves food. But they didn't. They didn't want to waste time planting gardens. They only wanted gold. The third, and possibly one of the biggest mistakes, was they built Jamestown on a swamp or a marshland. Basically, when it rains or when there's a wet season, that area would flood with water and create basically muddy ground. And that was a horrible decision on their part. So, to repeat some of their mistakes, they didn't want to work in the gardens, so nothing grew, and people died because of it. The swamp water that rose during the wet season brought mosquitoes, and mosquitoes bring malaria, a horrible disease that killed many in Jamestown. They also, because of the swamp waters, the ground was ruined really to plant anything. So even if they realized their mistake and wanted to plant later on, the water would ruin the land that they needed to plant. More people died. They also never learned to hunt, and they never learned to fish at this point. And so their food sources are completely gone. Luckily, John Smith was there to help Jamestown at this time. He went out and he actually searched for the Indians in the area so that he could get some help from them. Powhatan, I have his name listed there, was the chief of chiefs. That means he was the top chief over all of the smaller chiefs in the area. And he sought out these Indians and he would trade with them, trade things like compasses or knives or things that the Indians had never seen before, and he would trade for seeds or for food or for other supplies that they needed to keep them surviving and keep them from dying. During this trade with Powhatan and this relationship with the Indians, at one point, John Smith is captured by the Indians and he is basically sentenced to death. And here's where we get this famous scene where John Smith is about to be executed by Powhatan, but in comes Pocahontas and saves his life. Now, Some people believe that this really was him being captured and that Powhatan was so very angry he was he was full of rage and he wanted to kill John Smith, and in rushes Pocahontas in this dramatic way and saves John Smith's life. But some historians also think that maybe this was kind of a ritual that they would do, that it was kind of um, a symbol that Powhatan had power and that he could have killed John Smith's life. And it was more of a kind of a ceremony that he put on where basically he sentences John Smith to death, showing his power, and then also has his daughter rush in and ask for mercy so that he can also show how merciful he is as a chief of chiefs. So some people believe it was more of a ritual, and that if Powhatan really wanted John Smith to be executed, that he could have done it easily. But in steps Pocahontas, who is a very important figure in Jamestown, and we will talk about her a lot more a little bit later. But when John Smith is concerned, this did happen somehow in history where Pocahontas was known to save his life. What didn't happen in history is the next slide. This is nowhere in history where Pocahontas and John Smith fell in love and had some kind of romantic relationship. This did not happen in history. In fact, when John Smith was at Jamestown, Pocahontas was about 13 years old, a young teenager at the time, just the daughter of the chief. She wasn't anything or anywhere close to John Smith's age at that time. So she did end up marrying someone from Jamestown, but it was not John Smith. That did not happen in history. Pocahontas did help Jamestown, and so did John Smith. So after more people came to Jamestown from England, once they found out that they needed help and that they were established, they sent more people to Jamestown. And so, in sending them to Jamestown, John Smith becomes the leader. He becomes the president, so to say, of Jamestown. He can now make all of the decisions, hopefully with more wisdom than these gentlemen did. And he does start changing some things. He begins to trade with the Indians for different crops that would grow. He made them plant gardens so that they could grow things and have food for the future. He kept peace with those Indians. So the Indians, while John Smith was there, wouldn't attack or wouldn't try to kill people from Jamestown. They were more at peace with him because he would trade with them. And most importantly, he made everyone, gentlemen included, he made them all work, because those gentlemen were being very lazy in the beginning and not working and expecting everything to be done for them. Well, John Smith made a law that if you don't work, you don't eat. And some of the gentlemen, I'm sure, challenged this and tried to not work, tried to stay home and not do anything. And sure enough, when it was time to serve up the food, they did not get any. Because when John Smith was in charge, he made it a law, if you don't work, then you don't get to eat. So John Smith was a great leader of Jamestown. But one day, a horrible accident happened and he was injured, badly injured in an explosion. Many believe that it was his gunpowder bag that they would wear on their waist that somehow ignited and exploded. And he was injured so badly that he had to be put onto a ship and he had to be sailed back to England to get medical care because Jamestown just did not have the doctors that he needed. So he left and he went to England so that he could get better. Jamestown without John Smith did horribly. More people had arrived there at Jamestown, but there was not enough food yet to feed all of those people. Even with the new gardens and everything, there wasn't enough. The laziness returned. Without John Smith there to keep tabs on all those gentlemen, they started slacking off again. And lastly, the Indians would refuse to trade without John Smith there. Once he was gone, they didn't feel the obligation, or they didn't feel the need to trade with Jamestown anymore. So now Jamestown is left to fend for themselves with very little food, and winter hits, and winter is called starving time. The winter of 1609 to 1610 is called starving time because about half of Jamestown starved to death because of the horrible conditions that were there. No food, no trade with Indians, no leadership to make them work. It was a horrible, horrible time for Jamestown. However, Jamestown survives. They survive all of this and they live on to become a colony and to become the first county in our country from England. And we will talk about Jamestown even more later on in our history book because it remains a very important place. John Smith also survives his injuries, but he will never return to Jamestown. He does, however, return to North America. He just doesn't go back to Jamestown. He actually goes further up north, and he does one of the things that he really enjoyed doing, and that was making maps. He enjoyed making maps and drawing, and if I say so myself, he's a pretty good artist. This right here is a map that was actually drawn by John Smith. Down at the very bottom it says so, that John Smith was the one who mapped and drew out this whole map here. And I think this is so cool to see some of his actual artwork. And if you zoom in, you can actually see the letters here spell out Powhatan, because he is showing the area in this map that Powhatan is in charge of. He was very aware of the different Indian tribes that were all around, and this just shows once more how much Powhatan really was in charge of Pocahontas's father. So here we have John Smith, an English soldier who I think was very influential in keeping Jamestown alive during a very, very difficult time. So hopefully this was helpful for you to learn a little bit about John Smith, and I will see you in the next video.